Chris, you're already introduced by Steffi.
I
So,
am. What a superb
yes.
job she did. And thank you for lining me up so impeccably there, Steffi. I hope to live up to your expectations.
So any
Um,
questions you have on Steffi, please hold them until after the contribution of Chris. We will have a small session, possibly with question, and otherwise we will do them at the end of the day. But well, now we will be joined by Chris, who is the owner of Croome Court and Walled Garden, and he will tell us about all the exciting things going on at Croome. So, Chris, please.
let me thank you. Let me just share. Um, can you see that?
Yes, we can see that.
Yep. Okay. We're ready to go then. Um, Thanks again, Steffi. And I'd like to add my tribute to Susan Campbell before I start. Susan was an amazing friend and a great inspiration, and I would go as far as to say, without her insights and without her support, we may well have faltered along the way with our amazing restoration project. So, thank you, Susan. And thank you all for inviting me to talk about the walled gardens at Croome, and particularly our wonderful dipping pond. Um, Again, it wouldn't be appropriate to start without paying appropriate tribute to the sixth Earl of Coventry, who was really the powerhouse during the 1700s. He died in 1809, actually, but he took to the seat in 1750, and one of his first actions was indeed to appoint Lancelot Brown, who's already been paid a magnificent tribute. And I think this is probably the only photograph in existence of him, or picture of him in existence, because this is the famous one, of course. I would add to Steffi's presentation very briefly, just to reinforce the incredible unseen work that Brown did, and it's appreciated that that it's recognized, at least in our fraternity. You can see here, this is a picture that I took actually back in 2002, shortly after we arrived at Croome, and you can see in the background the river, which was slightly clogged up then. But that was a man-made river by Brown and his team. Its function was essentially to drain the land. And again, as Steffi rightly pointed out, it was achieved through an incredible feat of engineering, through a series of man-made culverts. And there was a header tank, effectively, which was a man-made lake, which was about 3-4 kilometers up north of Croome. And that fed the water through and underneath the mansion as well. So a lot of synergy with Sion and Packington. The walled garden, sorry, just to show you, you can see the scale of the walled garden here. It's just over 7 acres, approximately 2.5 hectares, making it the largest of its kind at that time. And referring to an article in the Gardening World magazine, dating back to the 18th of February 1887, which did a feature on Croome, and in particular the walled gardens. And you can see here, just make out the magnificent array of glass houses, from the tomato to the pineapple to the melon and cucumber, peach and fig, and the orchard house, and the magnificent vine house at the very back. Sadly, when we arrived in 2000, it didn't quite look like that. It was more like this. You can't really see much of what was left. This was the vine house, the magnificent vine house, the back sheds. For the want of a small amount of money's worth of lead, it did an incalculable amount of damage to the back sheds and the buildings. And like so many of these walled gardens, it was used as a dumping ground, basically. So it was in a very poor state. You wonder at this point what we were thinking of for taking it on. And I must admit, sometimes I still don't have an answer to that question. Again, Steffi briefly showed this plan in her presentation, but it highlights very nicely the dipping pond, which is centrally north and south of the walled garden. And what you can't see from this is that it's actually at the bottom of the slope, which is an unsurprising place to locate the pond. Again, when we first arrived in 2000, bear in mind that the gardens had been derelict for over 50 years at that point. We actually found a couple of full-grown goat willows, which we pulled out with a large piece of our machinery. But soon after, the reeds grew back. The pond was basically not particularly in our focus. As you can see, we had other things on our mind in the background. So we essentially left the pond to its own devices. Having pulled the trees out, I'm not sure if that was the cause of the damage, but it never really held water after that. It did for a while, but the overflow had blocked. So thankfully, in a sense, it drained naturally. So although we left it alone, we needed to clear the site around it because it was being where it was. It was right at the main gate entrance to the garden, and therefore we needed important access around the pond. So we kind of cleared the site for that in mind, and then essentially got on with restoring firstly the gardener's cottage to give us somewhere to live, followed by the glass houses and the repairs to the walls, which were extensive to put it mildly. But at a certain point, around about 2007, we embarked upon changing the topography of the garden, which we had to do through necessity because, as I mentioned, the garden is on a slope, and over time, the slope had kind of slid down and had obscured this historic path here. So we knew that we would have to sort of dig into the hillside. And as we did, we came across this old land drain, which we discovered later had been put in by Brown in 1764, along with the dipping pond, as part of his solution for providing a sustainable water supply for the garden. So that was our opportunity to start the program for the long-term program for the irrigation system. What we did was we put in a porous modern land drain and then backfilled it. As you can see here, these are just bricks. There were stones set on top of the bricks that formed effectively this chamber that carried the water previously. That was no longer functional, so there was an opportunity to put in a new drain. As a result of that, the drain or the land drain was so efficient that it very quickly filled the pond up. So in a sense, it forced the issue for us in order to actually turn our attention to restoring the pond. Although at that point, it didn't really have a function. There was no gardening going on, so there was no garden to water as such. However, we realized that sooner or later work would need to be done. So in 2011, we set about clearing the pond, which was a fun task, and repairing the circumference. Pretty much all of the original stones were there. They'd lost love, basically. So we gave it some love and restored it all back to its former glory. But this time we were taking no chances, realizing the importance of the water to the garden. And this picture actually serves quite well. You can see the slope of the garden. You can see how deep the alcove is that we cut back into the garden, and you can see our feeble attempt at growing things. During this time, we were actually our irrigation system was really from our main house water supply, so that was how we were irrigating. But with the dipping pond now coming back to life, I very soon realized that if we were going to do a sustainable solution, we would need to be pragmatic. There's also an opportunity to put a feature in the middle. Excuse me. What I mean by pragmatic was I decided to put a concrete base in there. The water was going to be such an important addition to the garden that we didn't want to take any chances. So here we have it, and voila, our pond is now complete. All of the rainwater that's captured from the now recently restored and ongoing restoration of the glass houses was pure. We don't use any chemicals in the garden, so the water itself was pure in nature. We have a very diverse range of pond life in there, from great crested newts to many other pond dwellers. And these days, there's a lot of pond life, a lot of plants in there as well. So time went on. In 2014, we finally succumbed to the insistence of the National Trust, or the request from the National Trust for us to open the walled gardens to the public. And very soon we realised that we needed to change our game plan. There was essentially just grass paths there originally. They were not suitable to carry the footfall of 5,000 plus visitors a year, particularly with wheelchairs and pushchairs and the like. So the following year, we embarked upon a new layout for the garden. This was done with the help of our good friend Mike Thurlow, who was the previous head gardener at Audley End, and Mike gave us some wise advice and help, and also encouraged us to be a bit daring. So we decided to put this new layout, this new path layout in the garden, which was quirky, completely completely off the wall, but it was our way of giving the garden a new personality and acknowledging that, of course, it's a living thing. So what we made a bit of a schoolboy error, though, having put the paths in and then created these zones that you can now, these discrete zones, which suddenly started to have their own names and features and functions. That, of course, none of them had water. So retrospectively, we had to dig just over 1.5 kilometers of meter deep channels. Excuse me. And of course, because we'd already put the paths in, we then had to put, I think it was 13 or 14 mechanical moles underneath the path to feed the new water pipes in. In addition to the water pipes, and given that we've just dug the garden to pieces, we also decided to use the opportunity to put in mains electricity, three-phase mains electricity, also a separate low voltage DC supply of electricity for controlling solenoid water valves, for instance. We put in Cat6 network cables, anything that you could think of that it might need in the future, we put it in there. And I'm glad we did. To a certain, we've used some of it, but I'm sure that our successors and their successors will probably make better use of it. But I'll come back to that in a moment. So we have our infrastructure in now. As you can see, these pipes are large. They're the sort of pipes that you would use if you were plumbing in a housing estate. They're 63 millimeter. They carry large volumes of water. So the water supply, well, of course, we've got our magnificent dipping pond, and the water that flows into the dipping pond is abundant to the point that maybe 80, even 90% of it goes through the overflow and down to Brown's River. We just capture what we can. So we put these two giant water tanks in at the top of the garden, and a little shed in the middle, which I affectionately call our pump house. Those water tanks are effectively the storage tanks. Then we pump the water from our pump house, of course. We pressurize it up to 6 bars, which for those of you who are not familiar with pressure, it's about 3 times the pressure of a domestic environment. So it's high pressure, and we've got the facility to pressurize it beyond that. There's 2 pumps. One is for redundancy, so if one breaks down, the other can kick in. We're very keen to ensure that this whole system is reliable. However, in 2021 and subsequently in 2022, when we had very dry summers, our water supply dried up, despite the huge tanks. Of course, it's a huge garden, so we found ourselves having to supplement the water system with our domestic water supply, which is on a meter, and that was financially very painful. So in the autumn of 2022, and in anticipation of having a repeat performance in 23, we turned our attention to the deep well at the top of the garden, and went online and contacted a company called Well Masters, who specialize in dredging wells. We figured that the well, we'd not done anything other than put the new head on it since our time there. We knew that it had been backfilled to a certain extent, although there was still water in it. But we knew that dredging it was the next way forward. And with some caution, we proceeded, because of all the places there might be some dark secrets, that's probably the one place that you would expect. So we contracted Well Masters, and they turned up. The chap brought his wife with him, and shortly after, and much to my amazement, she put on a harness, and before we knew it, she was down the well, and he was raising and lowering buckets, and they progressively cleared down about 4 meters of sludge before they hit some inanimate objects, which were too heavy for them to pull out. So they had to go away and come back and bring a new, larger crane. You can see the red steel beamed crane. And they then carried on with their project, and actually pulled out the original pump, which is cast iron. You can see in the foreground that the head of the pump and the water pipe. And if you look carefully, you might see what I'm calling the con rod, which was effectively the rod that ran concentrically through the middle of the pump, and it's actually made of timber. So if you think of this as like an upside down bicycle pump, that's basically how it worked. But what it did was to inform us of exactly how deep the well was, at least in the day when they were using it, because by sticking all the bits of the pipe end to end and measuring it, we knew where we were going. And fantastically, we actually managed to dig down to 16 meters from about 8 meters. So we've actually achieved a further 8 meters of depth. And the well itself is about 1.5 meters in diameter. And now the depth of the well is way below the water table. So we have a pump down there. We've used it. It's not exactly rained particularly in 2023, but we did use it a couple of times, and it recovers very quickly. So just on the technical terms, effectively, the water that we store through the dipping pond, which holds about 200,000 litres, the tanks, which are each about 90,000 litres, and the well, which is about another 20,000 litres. So collectively, we've got about 400,000 litres of resource. And bear in mind, as soon as we start to use that water, the pond fills back up, the well fills back up. So it's essentially it's a reoccurring thing. We're now confident that we have complete sustainability and independence with our water supply, which of course is all rainwater. So, well, what to do now? Now that we've got this wonderful resource, it's time to celebrate it. So, going back to the zones around the garden, one of the big zones in the middle is now about to become our water feature garden. You can see this sort of diamond-shaped cutout that we started. There are 4 paths that feed into it, and this will be the location where the new water feature will go. We haven't finalized what that feature will be yet, but I envisage it being a large, maybe 8 by 8 meter shallow pond with some kind of pressurized water fountain in the middle. But what we have learned is that it makes sense wherever we plan to put features of this sort in the future to have independence. We've got this abundant resource of water, but so much of it is just going down the drain, literally. It makes sense wherever possible to put some more tanks in. So in this instance, we decided to dig a big pit and put a concrete pad in. This is a 3,000 litre tank. It's relatively small compared to the rest, but it should give the the water feature its autonomy. It's underground, well, it will be. We've dug our trenches again. So again, wherever we divide up a zone within the garden, we subdivide all of the resources. So the water, the electricity, the network cables all go to each and every zone, so that again our successors, or who knows, maybe we can make use of some of the power that can bring. Yeah, there's the water tank underground, we've had to stop work until recently because, well, I don't know what it's been like in Europe, but those of you who live in the UK will know that we've just not had a dry spell for so long. We've not been able to get on the ground to finish it. So I think it will be a work in progress during 2024. But also we do have a rather ambitious new plan, which again is based on our benevolent water feature, or water resource, should I say. And it was inspired by a visit to Dereham Park last year. And they've got this, I don't know, for those of you who haven't been, here it is. It's a magnificent cascade. It just inspired us to do something similar up on our daffodil bank. It would be of a similar size to this. And again, what we will probably do is to dig and put a tank at the bottom, an underground tank, so that again this will feed it, it will be independent of the main system, although the main system is there to top it up as necessary. So I've kind of raced through that. That's it. You can see the dipping pond quite clearly from here. This was earlier on last year, so things have come on quite a bit since then. But if you find yourselves in Worcestershire at any point, please come and visit, be our guests, and we'll do our best to welcome you. Thank you very much for listening.